The reinforced door, a slab of tempered steel scarred by the heat, groaned as the lead investigator pulled it open further. A wave of acrid ozone and burnt synthetics rolled out, clinging to my clothes like a shroud. This was the sanctum of Dr. Aris Thorne, a mind rumored to be a generation ahead of everyone else, now reduced to a smoldering testament of his ambition. "Rough one, Reed," the lead investigator said, his voice muffled by the respirator. "Thermal event, massive pressure spike. Looks like a catastrophic containment breach. Our preliminary assessment points to either a miscalculation or, more likely given the man's reclusive nature, self-termination." I nodded, adjusting the seal of my own respirator, the rubber tasting faintly of sterile processing. The air inside the lab was thick, a viscous soup of particulate matter suspended in the artificial light that still flickered from a few overhead panels. What wasn't charred black was coated in a fine, gray ash. Walls of what I knew to be advanced polymer composites had buckled inward in places, outward in others, a testament to the sheer force unleashed. Glass-fronted containment units lay shattered, their contents, once meticulously organized biological samples, I presumed, now a chaotic mosaic of broken shards and unidentifiable organic smears. The pervasive smell of cooked protein mingled disturbingly with the metallic tang of burnt circuitry. My boots crunched on debris as I stepped inside, each movement deliberate, my eyes sweeping the devastation. This wasn't just a lab, it was a fortress of intellect. Multi-layered security protocols, biometric scanners, environmental controls that could isolate a single airborne molecule, all designed to protect the groundbreaking research Thorne was known for. And yet, here it was, ripped apart from the inside out. The lead investigator gestured towards the center of the main research bay. "We found him here." My gaze followed his gloved hand. What remained of Dr. Thorne was slumped against a workstation, or what used to be one. The immediate area was the epicenter of the destruction, a vortex of concentrated heat and pressure. The workstation itself was a twisted metal skeleton, its console melted into an unrecognizable slag. Thorne's body was severely disfigured, a tragic testament to the proximity of the blast. His lab coat, or what was left of it, was fused to his torso, and the skin was blackened, blistered, and sloughed in places. The posture suggested a desperate, involuntary flinch, a final, futile attempt to shield himself from the inevitable. "The initial theory holds," the lead investigator continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a professional detachment honed by years of witnessing human tragedy. He was working alone, late, as usual. One of his experimental bioreactors, perhaps. The sheer force suggests an uncontrolled runaway reaction. I walked a slow perimeter, my eyes scanning, not just seeing the obvious destruction, but looking through it, searching for the discordant note. The lead investigator was right, the scene screamed accident. The scale of the devastation, the complete immolation of the primary equipment, Thorne's position, it all fit the narrative of a brilliant mind consumed by his own creation. Suicide by scientific means wasn't unheard of, especially among those who walked the razor's edge of discovery. My gaze drifted from the body to the floor directly beneath it. The concrete slab, reinforced and polished, was scorched black in a wide, irregular pattern. But then, my eyes snagged on something. Not on the black, but on a sliver of unburned gray concrete, no larger than my thumbnail, nestled just inside the periphery of the main scorch mark. It was an anomaly, a tiny island of untouched surface within a sea of carbonized material. I knelt, my knees protesting against the grit and debris. The lead investigator paused, watching me. I pulled a small, high-intensity penlight from my kit, directing its beam onto the minute detail. Under magnification, the edges of that gray sliver weren't sharp and defined, as if something had simply shielded it from the blast. Instead, they were feathered, almost abraded, as if a localized, extremely fine abrasive had been at work before the main thermal event. The scorching pattern itself was another point of contention. While widespread, the intensity was uneven. There was a primary concentric burn, yes, but emanating from it, almost imperceptible unless you were specifically looking for it, were faint, linear traces, like miniature, almost invisible scorch lines, radiating outwards from Thorne's immediate vicinity. They weren't consistent with the chaotic, omnidirectional spread of an explosion. They were directional. My internal monologue shifted from observation to interrogation. A catastrophic breach should produce a more uniform, outward-spreading thermal signature. This wasn't uniform. And that tiny, abraded gray patch, preserved like a fossil in a field of ash, whispered of something else entirely. It was too small to be a random artifact, too specific in its character to be dismissed as collateral damage. The thermal signature, I murmured, more to myself than to the lead investigator. It's inconsistent. He scoffed softly. Inconsistent? Read, the man was practically vaporized. It was a hell of an explosion. Yes, I agreed, rising slowly, my gaze still fixed on the subtle details. A hell of an explosion. But the micro-patterns on the floor, the feathered edges of that unburned patch, they don't quite align with a simple runaway reaction. They suggest something else was present. Something that created a very specific, almost surgical, pre-event alteration to the surface. And the radiating burn lines. They're too precise for chaos. The lead investigator just stared at me, his expression unreadable behind the respirator. He knew my reputation. He knew I didn't chase phantoms. You're saying it wasn't an accident, he finally asked, the implication hanging heavy in the charged air. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I retrieved a set of microswabs and a sample collection vial. I'm saying, I began, carefully collecting a minute scraping from the feathered edge, that something here doesn't quite fit the narrative. And what doesn't fit, in a scene like this, is usually the most important piece of all. The tension in the lab, already thick with the smell of death and destruction, now crackled with a new, colder energy. My gut, a reliable instrument honed by years of sifting through the aftermath of human cruelty, told me this wasn't an unfortunate accident. This was an act, meticulously planned, executed with a devastating precision that belied the apparent chaos. Dr. Aris Thorne had not simply made a mistake, nor had he chosen to end his own life. Someone else had chosen for him, and they had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their tracks. My work had just begun. The sterile hum of the air filtration system was the first thing that struck me in the military medical facility restricted autopsy section. It was a low, insistent drone that seemed to vibrate in my teeth, a stark contrast to the acrid quiet of Thorne's ruined lab. Access had been a bureaucratic maze, but my badge, stamped with the highest clearance, eventually granted me passage. The chief pathologist, a woman with weary eyes and hands that moved with practiced efficiency, stood over the gurney. Thorne's body, or what remained of it, lay beneath a sheet. She gestured for me to approach, her voice a low murmur that barely cut through the machinery's drone. Initial assessment points to a massive thermal event, she began, pulling back the sheet. My stomach, usually a stable anchor in these situations, gave a familiar lurch. The burns were extensive, charring the skin to a leathery crisp in places, but what caught my eye immediately were the patterns. Not uniform, not radiating from a single, catastrophic point of origin as one might expect from a lab explosion. Instead, there were distinct lines of demarcation, almost like a shield had been in place, protecting certain areas while others were obliterated. The thermal damage is severe, as you can see, the pathologist continued, her gloved finger tracing a particularly brutal burn along Thorne's arm. But the distribution. It's inconsistent with a general blast overpressure. We're seeing areas of extreme, localized heat, alongside areas that, while damaged, suggest some form of transient shielding. I leaned closer, my gaze sweeping over the scene. Transient shielding? Or a rapid, directional energy release, she clarified, her brow furrowed. The bone fragmentation, particularly around the chest cavity, doesn't align perfectly with the external blast trauma either. There's an internal pressure component, almost like an implosion in some areas, an explosion in others. The body took a hell of a beating, but it's a chaotic symphony of forces, not a single, dominant chord. This was it. The first crack in the official narrative. My mind began to piece together the fragments, connecting them to the unusual burn pattern I'd seen on the lab's equipment. This wasn't just an accident. This was something else entirely. Anything else? I asked, my voice tight. The pathologist paused, her eyes narrowing. Yes. Something unusual. We found this. She held up a small, clear evidence bag containing a microscopic speck. Embedded in the epidermal layer of his left forearm, near a less severe burn. It's a silicon carbide crystal. Not the industrial grade typically used in lab equipment, but a rarer, purer form. We ran it through the database. It's consistent with a specific type of abrasive used in high-precision optical grinding. The kind you'd find in a specialized optics workshop, not a biological research lab. A silicon carbide crystal. Not from the lab. My internal gears clicked. This wasn't a random contaminant. It was too specific, too out of place. It was a signature, a breadcrumb left by someone who didn't belong in Thorne's world, or at least, not in that aspect of it. The tension in the room thickened, a palpable weight. Later that day, the military transport helicopter dropped me back at the perimeter of the facility housing Thorne's lab. My first order of business was to chase down the immediate connections. Thorne was a solitary figure, but even recluses leave ripples. The rival scientist, Dr. Vance, was a man sculpted by ambition, sharp suits, and sharper words. He sat across from me, hands steepled, an almost predatory glint in his eyes as I questioned him about Thorne. Thorne was brilliant, yes, Vance admitted, a patronizing edge to his tone. But erratic. His methods were unorthodox. And his secrecy, frankly, bordered on paranoia. He hoarded his findings like a dragon its gold. We had our disagreements, of course. Academic discourse, professional competition. Nothing more. He saw rivals where there were only colleagues seeking collaboration. I watched his facial micro-expressions. A flicker of something, satisfaction? Relief crossed his features when he spoke of Thorne's demise. Vance had a clear motive. Thorne's research was groundbreaking, potentially revolutionary. Its disappearance, or rather, the cessation of its development under Thorne, could open up vast opportunities for others. Vance's research, while significant, had always been overshadowed by Thorne's more audacious leaps. Thorne's competitive nature, his refusal to share, had clearly chafed at Vance. Next, I tracked down the former research assistant, Maya. He was a ghost of a woman now, working a menial data entry job, her once bright scientific career derailed. I found her in a cramped cubicle farm, surrounded by the monotonous click of keyboards. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes downcast. "He pushed me out," she said, her voice barely a whisper, eyes fixed on her screen. Said I was a liability. Too many questions. Too much curiosity about the real scope of his work. He was always so secretive, especially towards the end. Muttered about safeguards and unforeseen variables. He implied I was a risk to the projects. Integrity, not my own. Her bitterness was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak she wore. She spoke of Thorne's increasingly demanding nature, his relentless pursuit of his final project, and his abrupt dismissal of her after years of loyal service. There was a hurt there, a sense of betrayal that could easily fester into resentment, or worse. She knew the lab's intricacies, its protocols, its vulnerabilities. He would have had access, at one point, to almost everything. As I left her, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, my mind raced. A rival scientist, driven by ambition and professional jealousy. A disgruntled former assistant, possessing intimate knowledge of the lab and a deep-seated grievance. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation. This was a symphony of intent, meticulously orchestrated, and I was just starting to hear the opening notes. The tension I'd felt in the lab now tightened into a knot in my gut. The assistant's words, heavy with a bitter resentment, still echoed in my ears. He had painted a picture of Thorne, the reclusive visionary, transforming into a demanding, almost tyrannical figure, consumed by his final project. Her loyalty, once a shield, had been shattered, leaving behind a raw wound of betrayal. It was a compelling motive, a classic narrative of a scorned subordinate. They whispered of something far more calculated, a precision that hinted at a different kind of expertise. My focus, for now, had to shift from the human element to the digital. The lab itself was a fortress of scientific secrecy, nestled deep within a secure corporate campus. Thorne's private research area, a series of reinforced chambers behind biometric locks, was where the true answers resided. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, past silent workstations and automated equipment, until I reached Thorne's personal terminal, the nerve center of his operations. The corporate security team had already secured the physical area, but the digital realm was mine. I connected my secure diagnostic tools, bypassing the standard login protocols. The system hummed to life, a low thrumming sound beneath the controlled quiet of the room. Thorne had been meticulous with his security, a web of encryption layers and multi-factor authentications. It took time, a methodical unraveling of each digital knot, my fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. The stakes were immense, the implications terrifyingly broad. My eyes scanned through project files, data logs, and experimental parameters. Millions of lines of code, complex algorithms designed to map and modify human genetic structures. It was a world I understood only in its forensic aftermath, the physical consequences of its abstract brilliance. Then I saw it. Not a glaring hole, but an almost imperceptible ripple in the data stream. This wasn't a simple deletion. This was an attempted wipe, sophisticated and deliberate, designed to leave no trace for anything less than a deep-dive forensic analysis. Someone had tried to erase specific project files, not just from the Active Directory, but from the system's deeper archival layers. My internal clock registered the activity within the last 48 hours, prior to the discovery of Thorne's demise. The attempt was thorough, almost surgically precise, yet incomplete. It spoke of a hurried hand, or perhaps an interruption. The ghost of the data remained, like a faint outline in dust, enough for my tools to reconstruct the fragments. As I sifted through the remnants, a partial project identifier emerged, Project Chimera. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. Read? The soft voice startled me. I turned to see the assistant, Maya, standing hesitantly in the doorway, her shoulders hunched. She clutched a worn, leather-bound notebook to her chest, her knuckles white. My gaze fixed on her. Someone tried to wipe specific project files from Thorne's system. Within the last 2 days. Her eyes widened further, and she took an involuntary step back. Her grip on the notebook tightened. He was always so careful, she murmured, her voice laced with fear. About the data. The security. Said it was the only thing keeping them from taking everything. Who is them? I pressed, my voice even, though my internal alarm bells were ringing. This was the opening I needed. She shook her head, a tremor running through her frame. He never said. Just them. He started getting like that a few months ago. Paranoid. Locking himself in here for days. Checking the feeds constantly. He'd pace, muttering about invisible eyes, about spies in the system. Said someone was trying to undermine his work, to steal his research before it was ready. Was this before or after he dismissed you? I asked, watching her closely. She flinched. Before. It intensified after. He said I was too close, too much of a risk. That I knew too much. He started deleting things from my own access, claiming it was for my protection, to keep me out of their crosshairs. His gaze finally met mine, filled with a raw, unsettling fear. He was terrified, Reed. Truly terrified. And now. This wasn't just a lab accident, or a despairing act of self-destruction. And those predators had finally cornered him. Her words, the colleague's chilling account of Thorne's last days, echoed in my mind. Paranoia, frantic data manipulation, a target. It wasn't just a misstep in the lab, or a final, desperate act. This was planned, precise. My gaze fell back to the microscopic fragments secured on the slide, a sliver of something alien amidst the scorched debris from Thorne's research space. The initial forensic sweep had flagged it as an anomaly, too minute for immediate identification, too resilient to the inferno that had consumed the rest. A technician, a stoic individual with steady hands, adjusted the aperture of the advanced spectral analyzer. The machine, an intricate assembly of lenses and light sources, focused its beam onto the minute sample. I watched the display, a kaleidoscope of fluctuating wavelengths, searching for a pattern, a signature. My fingers tapped a silent rhythm against the cold, metallic console. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each passing second tightening the knot of anticipation in my gut. The technician's eyes, usually impassive, narrowed slightly. "Got something," they murmured, their voice low. The spectral fingerprint was unique, unlike any organic compound or common industrial material. The system word, accessing vast databases of known materials. The technician navigated the interface with practiced ease. Seconds later, a match flashed on the screen, accompanied by a detailed molecular structure and properties. Polymer, synthetic, advanced composite. The description scrolled, detailing its incredible tensile strength, heat resistance, and inertness. It was a rare, specialized material, not something you'd find in an everyday lab. The report indicated its primary application was in high-end industrial sectors, specifically in components requiring extreme durability and low friction under severe conditions. My mind raced, connecting the dots. This wasn't a stray fiber from Thorne's clothing, nor a residue from the lab's standard equipment. This was foreign, deliberately introduced, and designed to withstand the very forces that had obliterated everything else. A specific, highly engineered polymer. It narrowed the field significantly. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. A synthetic polymer used in high-end industrial applications. Thorne's research, while groundbreaking, was primarily theoretical and biological. This material didn't fit. It redirected the entire investigation, pulling it away from disgruntled academic rivals or personal vendettas. This pointed to industry, to powerful entities with the resources and the need for such advanced materials. Omnicorp. The name surfaced instantly. They were Thorne's primary financial backers, a conglomerate with a sprawling portfolio and a notorious reputation for aggressive R&D. They poured billions into cutting-edge technology, often acquiring smaller, innovative firms, or, more subtly, absorbing their discoveries. Thorne's groundbreaking work on bioengineered catalysts would have been a goldmine for them, worth any price. The next step was clear. I needed to speak with Omnicorp, and not just anyone. I needed their liaison, the person who had been the direct conduit between the corporation's vast interests and Thorne's isolated genius. Setting up the meeting was surprisingly easy. Almost too easy. The Omnicorp administrative assistant, efficient and courteous, scheduled me for later that afternoon. I found myself in a sleek, glass-and-steel building that dominated the skyline, a stark monument to corporate power. The lobby was minimalist, polished surfaces reflecting the subdued lighting, exuding an aura of controlled opulence. The liaison, a man with meticulously styled hair and an expensive suit that seemed to fit him like a second skin, greeted me in a conference room on the 40th floor. He introduced himself as the senior project manager for bioinnovations, his smile a practiced, almost professional, display of warmth. "Reed," I stated, offering a firm handshake. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Of course," the liaison replied, gesturing to a seat at the long, gleaming table. "Dr. Thorne's passing is a tragedy, a monumental loss to the scientific community, and to Omnicorp. Thorne's work, particularly in his final months. He was working on something revolutionary, wasn't he?" The liaison nodded slowly, his smile faltering just a fraction. "Indeed. Dr. Thorne was a visionary. His bioengineered catalyst research had the potential to redefine energy production. A truly world-changing endeavor. And Omnicorp was heavily invested, I prompted. Absolutely. We believed in his vision, provided substantial funding, resources, security even. We considered him one of our most valuable assets. He paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. Anything to ensure his genius could flourish unhindered. Speaking of security, I continued, pressing gently, the lab was state-of-the-art. How could such an incident occur? That's precisely what we're struggling to comprehend, he responded, a sigh escaping him. Our protocols are rigorous. Access was extremely limited, biometric, multi-layered. Only Dr. Thorne and a select few senior personnel had clearance to his primary research space. It truly baffles us. His eyes met mine, wide and seemingly sincere. But there was a flicker, a fleeting tension around his jawline that I didn't miss. We found a trace element at the scene, I stated, watching him closely. A synthetic polymer, extremely resilient, not commonly found in a biological research environment. Any idea how that might have gotten there? The liaison's composure didn't crack, but his gaze shifted, for a fraction of a second, to the expensive cityscape visible through the expansive window. His hands, previously resting casually on the table, clasped together, fingers interlacing tightly. A synthetic polymer? That's unexpected. Thorne worked exclusively with organic compounds, biological systems. Omnicorp manufactures a vast array of materials, of course, for various industrial applications, but none that would typically be used in his specific research. I assure you, we have no record of providing such a material to his lab. His denial was immediate, almost too quick. He was overly cooperative, offering explanations before I even finished the question, eager to distance Omnicorp from anything unusual. Perhaps it was contamination from outside, he suggested, his voice regaining its smooth cadence. Or a component in some obscure piece of equipment. We can provide you with a full inventory of every piece of hardware and every chemical compound supplied to Dr. Thorne, if that would assist your investigation. That would be helpful, I agreed, making a note. And what about Dr. Thorne's data? His research progress? All securely backed up, off-site, as per our agreements, the liaison assured me, his smile returning, a little too bright. We've already begun the process of retrieving it, to preserve his legacy. We'll be happy to provide access once it's cataloged and verified. I felt the tension thicken in the room, despite his calm demeanor. His overly helpful attitude, the eagerness to provide anything I asked for, felt like a deliberate smokescreen. He was giving me everything, except the truth. Omnicorp was no longer just a funder, they were a prime suspect. The calm demeanor of the executive was a carefully constructed facade, I was certain. His eagerness to provide information, to agree with every request, felt less like cooperation and more like an attempt to overwhelm me with noise, to obscure the signal. The synthetic polymer, the aggressive RAND, Thorne is a valuable asset, the pieces were there, but the picture remained stubbornly out of focus. I left the secure compound, the afternoon sun aglare off the polished chrome of the gate. My thoughts were still dissecting the executive's words, turning them over like spent cartridges, when the blare of a horn ripped through my focus. A delivery truck, oversized and speeding, swerved abruptly from the adjacent lane, its front bumper aiming directly for my driver's side door. I reacted on instinct, wrenching the wheel hard to the right, feeling the tires bite and squeal as my vehicle scraped against the concrete barrier separating the lanes. The truck roared past, a blur of faded green paint and exhaust fumes, without slowing. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp certainty. That wasn't an accident. The driver hadn't even attempted to correct, just held the line. Someone wanted me off the road. The near miss left a metallic taste in my mouth, a mix of adrenaline and suspicion. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up anymore, it was something far more dangerous. I took a winding route back to my off-site forensic lab, a nondescript unit in an industrial park, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Paranoia, perhaps, but after that close call, vigilance felt like a necessity. Inside my lab, the familiar scent of cleaning agents and ozone usually brought a sense of control, but today, a subtle disquiet prickled at me. I moved through the compact space, my eyes scanning, assessing. Nothing seemed overtly disturbed. The microscope was where I'd left it, the chromatography unit hummed its low, steady song. Then I noticed it. A single, almost invisible scratch on the polished aluminum frame of my main analytical workstation. It wasn't deep, barely a mar, but it wasn't there when I'd left that morning. I ran my thumb over it, feeling the faint imperfection. My lab was secure, layered with redundant access controls. No forced entry, no obvious signs. But someone had been here. Someone had known how to get in, how to leave minimal trace. My personal workspace breached. It was a message, subtle but clear: we know where you work, we can get to you. The message amplified my resolve. I pulled up the schematics for the synthetic polymer Thorne had been working on, cross-referencing suppliers for raw materials. This wasn't just about a dead bioengineer anymore, it was about protecting myself and uncovering a truth someone was willing to kill for. My phone vibrated, pulling me from the glowing screen. It was Maya, Thorne's lab assistant. His voice, usually composed, was brittle, edged with a fear I hadn't heard before. "Reed," he began, I need to talk to you. In person. I can't stay here. I'm at the diner near the old docks." I agreed immediately, grabbing my jacket. The diner was a greasy spoon, smelling of stale coffee and fried onions. Maya sat hunched in a booth in the corner, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. He barely touched the lukewarm tea the server had placed in front of him. "I'm scared, Reed," he whispered, his gaze darting around the near-empty diner. "After what happened to Thorne?" "And then, this morning, a colleague mentioned seeing a car like yours near my apartment, and I can't keep it to myself anymore." I leaned forward, my voice low. "What is it, Maya?" She took a shaky breath. "It was a few weeks before it happened. I was working late, trying to finalize some data for Thorne. I was on my way out, just past midnight, and I saw someone. Someone in Thorne's lab." "Who?" I pressed, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place: the executive's evasiveness, the polymer, the near miss, my breached lab. "I don't know," she insisted, shaking her head. "It wasn't Thorne. He was meticulous about security, always alone in there after hours unless he specifically authorized someone. This person." They were tall, broad-shouldered. They were moving quickly, like they didn't want to be seen. I thought it was strange, but Thorne was so secretive, I just assumed he'd let someone in, maybe a collaborator he hadn't told me about. Did you see them leave? No. I just saw them in the lab, and then I panicked and left. I thought about telling Thorne, but he was under so much pressure then, focused on the project. I didn't want to add to it. I convinced myself it was nothing. But now, with everything. The fire, the way he died, the questions, his voice trailed off, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. Someone was in there, Reed. Someone who shouldn't have been. The synthetic polymer. The unknown individual. That accidents aimed at me. It wasn't a lab accident, and it wasn't suicide. It was a deliberate, calculated act. And I was getting closer to unmasking the orchestrator, even if it meant stepping into the crosshairs myself. The air in Thorne's research lab still held the faint, acrid tang of burnt circuitry and something indefinably synthetic. A ghost of the chaos that had erupted here. I ignored the pervasive smell, focusing instead on the network cables snaking from the primary server rack. This was where the Rael story lived, hidden within lines of code and timestamped logs. My portable forensic workstation hummed, siphoning terabytes of data from the lab's central control system, the brain that governed every environmental parameter, every piece of bespoke equipment Thorne had engineered. I started with the environmental controls. Thorne's work involved highly volatile compounds, requiring stringent atmospheric regulation. Oxygen levels, nitrogen purges, temperature gradients, pressure differentials, all meticulously controlled, logged, and audited. The first pass through the data revealed nothing overtly suspicious. A cascade of sensor warnings, followed by automated system shutdowns, exactly what you'd expect from a catastrophic failure. Too clean. Too perfect. My fingers danced across the keyboard, filtering, cross-referencing. I wasn't looking for a single anomaly, but a subtle symphony of them. Dozens of entries, mostly Thorne, a few for authorized maintenance personnel. Then I found it. Most were blocked by Thorne's robust firewalls. But one, just one, had slipped through a week before the incident. A phantom key. It had established a brief, almost imperceptible connection, then vanished. Too short to do anything significant, or so it seemed. I shifted my focus to the physical scene reconstruction. The lab itself was a testament to Thorne's genius and paranoia. Layers of reinforced glass separated workstations, each designed to contain specific experimental conditions. The explosion had originated in the central chamber, where his most groundbreaking work was conducted. I meticulously mapped the burn patterns, the trajectory of debris, the precise points of structural failure. The initial investigation had concluded a pressure vessel rupture, but the evidence didn't quite fit. The damage was too localized, too directed. I knelt beside a charred console, running my gloved hand over the melted plastic. The heat had been intense, but contained. Like a surgical strike. The synthetic polymer I'd found earlier, a microscopic trace on the chamber's inner surface, kept gnawing at me. It wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's known research. It was an accelerant, or a catalyst, foreign to the lab's inventory. Back at my workstation, I correlated the remote access timestamp with system logs. Nothing directly triggered. No immediate commands. But then I looked at the sequence of environmental adjustments. 24 hours after the remote access, a barely perceptible dip in the chamber's nitrogen purge cycle, followed by a fractional increase in the ambient oxygen level, then a minute spike in localized temperature. Each event, on its own, was within operational parameters, a natural fluctuation. But together, over a period of hours, they painted a different picture. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. A precise, multi-stage manipulation. The remote access hadn't triggered the event directly. It had programmed it. A delayed fuse. The synthetic polymer, then, wasn't an accelerant for an explosion, but a reactive component, introduced at the precise moment the environment became unstable. It was the final, critical push. My internal thoughts raced. This wasn't a simple hack. This was intimate knowledge. Not just of the lab's systems, but of Thorne's specific experimental protocols, his precise tolerances, the exact chemical reactions he was trying to achieve. The orchestrator knew the pressure points, the vulnerabilities, and how to exploit them without leaving a digital fingerprint that screamed sabotage until you knew exactly what you were looking for. A call came in from the medical examiner. The timing was crucial. The medical examiner, a stoic individual with tired eyes, met me at the door. "Read. We've got the full toxicology and tissue analysis back on Thorne." "Good," I said, my voice tight. "I need to know about his respiratory system, specifically. Any unusual compounds? Signs of hypoxia followed by an extreme oxidative event?" The medical examiner nodded slowly, flipping through a file. "Remarkable. We found trace amounts of an unusual polymer in his lungs, indicating inhalation prior to death. Consistent with exposure to a highly reactive, volatile compound. And yes, markers for acute oxygen deprivation immediately preceding a massive internal oxidative stress event. His lungs, his internal tissues. It's like he was flash burned from the inside out, but without external charring." My gut clenched. It aligned perfectly. The programmed environmental changes had deprived Thorne of oxygen, rendering him unconscious, unable to react. Then, the polymer, introduced at the peak of atmospheric instability, ignited a chain reaction, consuming him from within. That accident was engineered to perfection, mimicking a catastrophic research malfunction while covering the true cause. And the cause of death? I pressed. Though I already knew. Officially, massive internal organ failure due to chemical exposure and extreme oxidative stress, the medical examiner confirmed. It's highly unusual. Not typical of a simple lab accident. It wasn't simple, I replied, the words hanging heavy in the cold air. It was meticulously orchestrated. Someone knew Thorne's work, his lab, down to the molecular level. They programmed his death, disguised it as a tragic miscalculation, and walked away clean. Until now. The tension in the room was palpable. I was no longer just investigating a death. I was dissecting a ghost, a brilliant, calculating mind that had weaponized science. And that ghost knew I was getting closer. The crosshairs felt like they were tightening around me. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unwavering glow on the stainless steel examination tables and the array of specialized tools laid out with surgical precision. It was a place designed for answers, yet Thorne's death still offered only questions, each one sharper than the last. The previous chapter's feeling, that tightening of crosshairs, hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had intensified, a prickle on the back of my neck telling me I was treading on ground far more unstable than I'd initially believed. The lead forensic technician, a meticulous individual with calloused hands from years spent disassembling the macabre, adjusted a microscopic camera. "The thermal signature on this piece," the technician murmured, tapping a stylus against a screen displaying an intricate heat map, "it's inconsistent with the overall explosion pattern. Localized, intense, almost surgical in its application, then rapidly cooled." I leaned closer, my brow furrowed. "Meaning what? A flashpoint initiator that didn't contribute to the main blast?" "Precisely. Or something that absorbed the energy, then dispersed it, leaving this anomaly. It's like a signature, but one designed to be erased by the very event it triggered." The technician shrugged, a hint of professional frustration in their voice. "Clever, whatever it was. Almost beyond our current analytical capabilities to fully reconstruct." Beyond reconstruction. That phrase echoed my own growing suspicion. The killer hadn't just wanted Thorne dead, they'd wanted his death to be untraceable, a perfect accident, but why? Theft of research data was one thing, but this level of destructive obfuscation, this intricate dance around the physical evidence, suggested a motive far deeper than simple corporate espionage. It wasn't about stealing Thorne's work, it was about preventing its completion, or, more critically, its release. My mind drifted back to Thorne's lab, the scattered notes, the incomplete logs. I'd assumed the gaps were due to the chaos of the incident, or perhaps Thorne's own reclusive work habits. Now, a different possibility gnawed at me. What if the logs weren't incomplete because they were destroyed, but because they were hidden? What if Thorne knew he was in danger, or that his work was being twisted, and had taken steps to protect his true intentions? I left the cold precision of the autopsy section, the technician still poring over the anomalous circuit fragment, and headed back to my mobile analysis unit. The unit was a nondescript vehicle, but inside, it hummed with the quiet power of advanced computing. Accessing the secured, mirrored drive of Thorne's primary research terminal, I bypassed the standard directories. I wasn't looking for obvious files anymore. I was looking for the digital equivalent of that localized burn pattern, something hidden, something designed to be missed. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, running custom scripts, probing for anomalies in data allocation, for unusual encryption layers that might have been overlooked in the initial sweep. Hours blurred. The glow of the screens reflected in my eyes, the only sound the soft whir of the cooling fans. Then, a faint flicker. An unusual cluster of corrupted sectors, initially dismissed as system damage from the blast, caught my attention. It was too perfect, too symmetrical in its corruption. A digital smokescreen. I isolated the cluster, running a deep scan algorithm. It took another agonizing half-hour before a hidden partition finally materialized, a ghost in the machine. It wasn't just encrypted, it was layered, a digital labyrinth Thorne had clearly built with meticulous care. Each passphrase hinted at scientific principles, philosophical concepts, and even obscure historical figures, a mental fingerprint of the man himself. Finally, the last layer gave way. A single directory appeared, labeled simply Integrity_Protocol. Inside, I found a series of detailed research logs, dated months before his death, meticulously chronicling his growing unease. Thorne hadn't just been a brilliant bioengineer, he was a man wrestling with his conscience. His early entries spoke of the immense potential of his discoveries, the promise of new energy sources, advanced materials. But as the logs progressed, the tone shifted. My work, one entry read, dated 6 months prior, is being steered. Not by me, but by unseen hands. The applications they propose are not for the betterment of humanity. They speak of containment, deterrence, but I see only the shadow of a weapon. The next entry, even more chilling, I've uncovered clandestine funding. Omnicorp. Not for my primary project, but for a parallel, more aggressive initiative. They're using my core principles, twisted, weaponized, for something truly dangerous. Something I cannot allow to be unleashed. My breath hitched. This was it. The hidden motive. Thorne wasn't just working on groundbreaking research, he was on the verge of exposing a global corporation's secret, deadly project. The logs continued, detailing Thorne's plan to compile irrefutable evidence, his intention to leak it to a specific, independent scientific ethics committee. He had been preparing to expose Omnicorp, to prevent the completion and public release of their weaponized application of his work. The crosshairs weren't just tightening around me, they had just become a bullseye. I wasn't just hunting a killer, I was now standing between Omnicorp and the secret they had gone to such elaborate, destructive lengths to bury. The game had just changed. And I was now a player, whether I liked it or not. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a relentless, anemic glow reflecting off the polished steel surfaces of my workstation. The scent of disinfectant, sharp and clean, warred with a faint, underlying metallic tang that always seemed to linger in places like this. My screens glowed, a constellation of encrypted data streams, biometric scans, and access logs. My breath still felt hitched in my chest, a phantom echo from the previous night's discovery. Thorne wasn't just a brilliant bioengineer, he was a whistleblower, on the precipice of exposing Omnicorp's secret, deadly project. The microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, they weren't just evidence of sabotage. They were the signature of a silencing. The killer didn't want the research, they wanted Thorne gone, his voice extinguished before he could speak. I leaned closer to the monitor, the images of Thorne's ruined lab still burned into my mind. The precision of the sabotage, the way the systems were bypassed, not brute-forced, but convinced to fail. It spoke of intimate knowledge, not just of the lab's layout, but of Thorne's specific experimental protocols, his unique security architecture. This wasn't an outside job. This was an inside operation, executed by someone who knew Thorne's world as well as he did, perhaps better. My fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up the master access logs for Thorne's research facility. Every swipe card entry, every biometric scan, every remote login attempt for the past 6 months flickered across the screen. I cross-referenced this with the facility's internal security camera footage, isolating the moments leading up to the catastrophic event. There were no anomalies in the physical entries, no forced breaches, no unauthorized personnel. Everyone who entered had legitimate clearance. This narrowed the field, but not enough. Legitimate clearance didn't preclude malicious intent. Who, among the authorized personnel, possessed the specialized knowledge to not only understand Thorne's groundbreaking work but also to meticulously dismantle it from within, making it appear as a tragic accident? Project collaborators, security personnel, administrative staff, corporate liaisons. The list was still too long. I began categorizing them by their specific skill sets, their educational backgrounds, their prior work experience. I focused on those with advanced degrees in bioengineering, systems architecture, or high-level security protocols. The pool shrank, but the faces remained largely unfamiliar, save for the few I'd interviewed. Then, I looked at the corporate liaisons. Omnicorp. The name resonated with a cold certainty now. I pulled up the profile of the Omnicorp liaison assigned to Thorne's project, David Thorne. No relation, the file noted, a detail I remembered from my initial glance. His role was oversight, ensuring Omnicorp's investment was protected. A perfectly legitimate presence. But as I delved deeper into his profile, a subtle unease began to prickle at me. His resume, initially blandly impressive, started to reveal inconsistencies, carefully smoothed over gaps. I clicked on a link to his prior employment, a seemingly innocuous consulting firm that, on closer inspection, had a history of contracts with intelligence agencies and private security contractors. Not the usual path for a corporate liaison in bioengineering. My brow furrowed. I dug further, bypassing the surface-level data, searching for public records, archived news articles, anything that wasn't curated for a corporate profile. It took time, sifting through layers of digital dust, but then I found it. A thinly veiled reference in an old investigative journalism piece, buried deep in an obscure online archive. The firm in question had been developing a similar, though less advanced, bioengineering solution to Omnicorp's own research trajectory. The article didn't name the operative directly, but it described his methods: sophisticated infiltration, subtle manipulation of internal systems, making it appear as an internal collapse rather than an external attack. David Thorne's profile suddenly snapped into sharper focus. His consulting background, his expertise in risk management, his presence as Omnicorp's eyes and ears on Thorne's project. It wasn't just oversight, it was surveillance. And his past wasn't just about corporate espionage, it was about covert operations, about silencing rivals through sabotage and subterfuge. He had the access. He had the technical knowledge. And now, I realized, he had the motive. Thorne was about to expose Omnicorp. David Thorne, the inside man, would have been the first to know, the one tasked with ensuring that exposure never saw the light of day. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, inevitable logic. The sophisticated sabotage, the meticulous cover-up, the intimate knowledge of Thorne's lab, it all pointed to the Omnicorp liaison. He wasn't just a suspect, he was becoming the prime suspect. And the true scope of Omnicorp's reach, and their ruthlessness, was just beginning to unfold. My investigation, to scare me off. This wasn't just corporate espionage, this was murder, and someone powerful wanted it to remain an accident. I immediately contacted Maya. Her voice on the phone was a thin thread of fear. Reed, I need to tell you something. I think I know who Thorne meant. About someone getting into the lab. I met her at a neutral location, a crowded coffee shop far from the university. He was shaking, clutching her cup with white knuckles. After you asked me about the data wipe, I remembered something else. Something Thorne said. He was convinced someone was in the lab, physically, after hours. He dismissed it as paranoia, but I saw it once, too. What did you see, Maya? I urged, trying to keep my voice calm. It was about 3 weeks before it happened. I was working late, trying to finish up some administrative tasks. Thorne had already left. I was locking up, and I saw a flicker of movement in the main lab area. Just a shadow, really, but it was inside. I thought it was Thorne, that he'd forgotten something, but then I heard the security system re-engage, the double lock sequence. It was too fast, too smooth for a normal exit. Like someone had bypassed it, then reset it perfectly. Could you identify the person? She shook her head, her eyes wide. No. It was dark, and they were gone in an instant. Just a silhouette. But I remember the way they moved. Not furtive, not panicked. Purposeful. Like they belonged there. And I smelled something. A strange, almost sweet, metallic scent. I dismissed it then, thought it was just some new reagent Thorne was experimenting with, but now. My call had been brief, precise. The lead detective on the case had listened, a low hum of understanding on the line, before confirming the immediate dispatch of a tactical unit to Omnicorp's executive offices. David Thorne's risk management expertise wasn't about mitigating threats, it was about orchestrating them, then capitalizing on the fallout. The cold knot in my stomach tightened further, twisting into something akin to vindication, but also a profound weariness. The news broke before dawn. I saw it flicker across the screens in the break room, muted, as I poured myself a third cup of lukewarm coffee. Omnicorp executive detained in Thorne investigation. The headlines were cautious, but the subtext was clear. The public relations machine that had worked so diligently to frame Dr. Thorne's death as a tragic accident was now scrambling, its carefully constructed narrative disintegrating under the weight of an unexpected truth. I spent the morning in a whirlwind of debriefings. The lead investigator, a seasoned veteran with tired eyes, laid out what they'd found after David Thorne's apprehension. His office, meticulously swept, still yielded a digital breadcrumb trail. Encrypted communications, shell corporations, financial transfers that painted a picture of calculated sabotage and profiteering. It wasn't just about Dr. Thorne's research, it was about controlling the outcome, manipulating the market, silencing anyone who stood in the way of a monumental gain. The sheer audacity of it, the cold-blooded calculation, left a bitter taste in my mouth. He didn't even put up a fight, the investigator remarked, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Just sat there, calm as you please, when they walked in. Like he'd been expecting it. I wasn't surprised. David Thorne had always been a man of control. His composure wasn't a sign of innocence, but of a deep-seated arrogance, a belief in his own invincibility. He had underestimated the microscopic, the infinitesimal details I had painstakingly pieced together. He had underestimated the quiet persistence of a forensic investigator. The unraveling of Omnicorp was swift and brutal. David Thorne's capture was the first stone in an avalanche. Other executives, their names flashing across news channels, were brought in for questioning. The corporate edifice, once impenetrable, began to crack, exposing a network of deceit and ambition that went far beyond a single research project. The media firestorm was immediate, intense. Experts debated the ethics of corporate espionage, the dangers of unchecked scientific advancement, the blurred lines between innovation and exploitation. My phone buzzed constantly with requests for comments, but I kept my distance, preferring the quiet logic of evidence to the clamor of public opinion. Later that week, I found myself in the sterile, hushed environment of the military medical facility restricted autopsy section. The chief medical examiner, a no-nonsense individual with a precise manner, presented the final report. The microscopic traces of a unique accelerant, the specific burn patterns, the subtle yet critical inconsistencies in the lab's environmental logs, everything I had flagged was now meticulously documented, corroborated, woven into a conclusive narrative of murder. Your initial observations were critical, Reed, the examiner stated, tapping a stylus against a holographic display of Dr. Thorne's internal scans. Without them, this would have been dismissed as a tragic accident, just as they intended. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the glowing blue skeletal model. The finality of it all settled heavily. Dr. Thorne, a brilliant mind, reduced to a collection of data points, a casualty in a war he hadn't known he was fighting. The satisfaction of solving the case was tempered by the cost. The conversation then shifted, as it inevitably did, to Dr. Thorne's research itself. The potential applications, the ethical implications, the sheer power contained within his final project. Governments, international organizations, scientific bodies, everyone was vying for control, for access. The data, recovered from encrypted drives and now secured under heavy guard, represented a paradigm shift, a key to unlocking advancements that could redefine entire industries. Or, in the wrong hands, unleash unimaginable chaos. The implications are staggering, the examiner murmured, almost to himself, as he closed the report. He created something truly extraordinary. And it cost him everything. I looked out through the reinforced glass of the viewing chamber, past the quiet hum of the facility, towards the distant city skyline. The world was reeling, grappling with the revelation that a revered scientific visionary had been murdered not by a random act, but by a calculated corporate conspiracy. The immediate fallout was chaos, a maelstrom of accusations, arrests, and public outrage. But beyond that, a new and unsettling question loomed. What would become of Dr. Thorne's legacy? Would his groundbreaking work be used for the betterment of humanity, or would it become another weapon in the endless struggle for power? The future, once clear in its pursuit of justice, now felt vast, uncertain, and infinitely more dangerous. My job was done, but the ripples of this case would spread far, touching shores I couldn't yet see. The revelation hung in the air, a toxic cloud that had finally dispersed, leaving behind a bitter taste. A revered scientific visionary, Aris Thorne, murdered not by a random act, but by a calculated corporate conspiracy. The words echoed in my mind even now, days later, as I stood in the sterile, hushed confines of the military medical facility restricted autopsy section. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, persistent drone, casting a harsh, unyielding glow on the polished steel surfaces. The air, scrubbed clean of any organic trace, still carried the ghost of formaldehyde, a scent that clung to my jacket even after I'd left. I was alone, save for the quiet presence of a facility technician performing inventory in a distant corner, his movements methodical, almost reverent. My eyes traced the outline of the empty examination table where Thorne's remains had once rested. It felt like a monument to a shattered ideal. The truth had been a slow, agonizing crawl from the microfractures in the lab floor to the encrypted communications hidden within a shell corporation's servers. The initial findings, pointing to suicide or a tragic accident, were meticulously crafted misdirections. My microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, they had been whispers, then shouts, of a narrative far more sinister. I had seen the evidence, piece by painstaking piece, build into an undeniable edifice of malice. The objective had been clear, not just to eliminate Thorne, but to seize control of his groundbreaking research, to weaponize discovery for profit, regardless of human cost. This wasn't merely a corporate acquisition gone wrong, it was a cold, deliberate act of scientific larceny, executed with surgical precision and a chilling disregard for life. The full scope of the conspiracy, the reach of the orchestrators, had been the true reveal. It wasn't just a disgruntled rival or an opportunistic competitor. This was a network, entrenched and powerful, willing to sacrifice a brilliant mind and potentially destabilize a global industry for a monopoly on progress. The implications were vast, stretching far beyond Thorne's lab, touching the very fabric of scientific ethics. What happened when the pursuit of knowledge became just another commodity to be stolen, suppressed, or perverted? The tension in the scientific community was palpable, a fragile trust now fractured. I ran a hand over the cool steel of a nearby instrument cart. The weight of it all pressed down on me, a familiar exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. Every case left its mark, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the complexity of the crime or the meticulousness of the cover-up. It was the scale of the betrayal, the corruption of a vision. Thorne, for all his reclusiveness, had believed in the transformative power of his work. He had poured his life into it, only for it to become the instrument of his undoing, and a pawn in a brutal corporate game. The personal toll was undeniable. Late nights bled into early mornings, the lines between my own thoughts and the victim's final moments blurring. I saw the flash of the plasma. Discharge, felt the heat, smelled the ozone. I sifted through the phantom debris, searched for the telltale sign of a struggle that wasn't there, because the killing had been too swift, too clinical. The faces of the investigators, the legal counsel, the facility personnel, blurred in my memory, each one a variable in a complex equation. The truth, once uncovered, was a heavy burden, not just for the perpetrators, but for those who bore witness to it. But then I remembered Thorne, his meticulous notes, his passionate, if sometimes illegible, scribbles in the margins of his research journals. He deserved justice. His work deserved to be understood, not stolen. And that commitment, that unwavering demand for truth, always pulled me back from the brink. It was the core of what I did, the only reason to endure the grim realities I faced day in and day out. The case was closed, at least officially. The orchestrators, after a protracted and fiercely contested legal battle, were facing the consequences of their actions. The corporate entity, once untouchable, now faced crippling sanctions and public condemnation. Thorne's research, once shrouded in secrecy and danger, was now under protective custody, its future uncertain but no longer held hostage by greed. There was a sense of finality, a quiet victory in the sterile air of the section. Yet, as I turned to leave, my gaze lingered on the empty table. The immediate conflict was resolved, the killer unmasked, justice, however imperfect, served. How far would humanity go in its relentless pursuit of progress? When did innovation cross the line into peril, and who would be there to draw that line, to stand guard against the corruption of discovery? My phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message, brief and urgent, from the department's supervisor. The cycle, it seemed, was endless. I took a deep breath, the phantom scent of formaldehyde sharpening my senses, and walked out into the muted corridor. The world was always in need of someone to look closely, to find the truth hidden in the smallest detail, no matter how unsettling. And I was ready.